You're listening to Stand Tall and Own It, the podcast for high-performing female leaders who are ready to make an impact by discovering the safety that comes from understanding their own value and exercising their own authority. I'm your host, Andrea Johnson, and I'm here to tell you it is time to just truly be you, my strong friend. It's time to stand tall and own it. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Stand Tall and Own It. I am Andrea Johnson, the Intentional Optimist, and I am recording, I think, my first ever audience question podcast episode. It's the most common question I get literally every day. I mean, it's in the interviews that I do, it's in the coaching that I do. Every client, when we get to a certain point in their work, this question comes up. And it's this question of what is the difference between a core value and a principle? What is something that is a non-negotiable? How do I know what's non-negotiable for me? And what is a principle or a value or a belief system or even company values? Because when I do interviews each week, the first thing we do when we talk about core values is we define the difference between an organizational value, which is basically mission and vision, and our core values, which are basically our non-negotiables, our wiring that we've had from birth, basically. And it is always the topic that I pitch when I go to talk to other podcast interviews. It's the main topic, and so I'm always ready to answer it. And it's gotten to where I'm saying it over and over and over. And I figured I'm going to create a resource, a really quick, hopefully, episode here, because it is also core values is one of the two big products that I sell. I sell core values course and coaching, and I sell disc products. And both of these things work together to help you figure out how you communicate. So since this is a daily question, I figured I would just put it out there and have a place that you could reference and come back to and kind of answer it for yourself, because who knows, maybe you're in the middle of working through your core values and figuring them out. But I want to make sure you have this as just a tool that will help answer kind of the nuances, because I don't think there's no nuance. This is not a black and white kind of thing. There are little gray areas in figuring out what works for you and what doesn't. So, of course, you know me, I am going to start with some definitions. And the definition that I use for core values goes like this. And this is where some of my questions come from, and I just can't find a better way to say it. But core values are the principles and priorities that guide an individual's actions. They represent the foundational convictions that allow a person to navigate complex situations while keeping their identity and authority at the forefront. Meaning, these are the non-negotiables inside of you or me that, when honored, are our anchor, our taproot, the boundary lines that we don't let anybody else cross without ramifications. And when we honor them, then we show up in our truest sense. Then our identity is intact. Who I am as a person is intact, and it's lovely. But the word that usually gets my clients, and it usually brings people in this particular definition, is authority. When we have our own authority, it matters not whether we've been given authority by a boss. It matters not whether other people see us as an authority. I have authority over me and what I'm going to do, what I'm going to think, what I'm going to say, and understanding those things really makes it gives you this ability to kind of weather the storms, and understanding and honoring your core values gives you all of that. So that's a core value, right? That's my first definition. Principles, according to the all-knowing Wikipedia, which, by the way, I actually looked at quite a few dictionary definitions, and this is a really good amalgamation of them. Wikipedia says a principle is a fundamental truth or proposition that serves as the foundation for a system of beliefs or behavior or a chain of reasoning. It is a guide for behavior or evaluation. For instance, in law practice, it's a rule that has to be or is usually followed. So the main difference between these two definitions is that core values are who we are and that are inside us and allow us to navigate things. Principles are outside of us. They feed systems or beliefs. They're they are attached to and related to behavior or something like a chain of reasoning. And like even it's a guide for behavior or evaluation. It's very measurable. They're usually things that we can say, this is how it works, right? I like to use the example of set theory, for instance, because I use the word principle in my definition of core values. But all core values, I could say, are principles. They are principles and priorities that guide you. But not all principles are core values. You know, you could say all apples are fruit, but not all fruit are apples. And the best way I can say that is, I just said it just a second ago, core values are me, principles are beliefs or values. And for me in my life, and you've heard this before, and I call myself the intentional optimist, these are my 6 tenets of intentional optimism. So I've personally done the work to find out what my core values are and what my own personal principles are. Many of us will use the principles of a leader or our organization to live out some of those things. I personally have just done it on my own. So the way that you can tell where you draw the line between core values and principles, because we could use the term beliefs or things that we value or something like that. But I think let's stick with just core values and principles for the sake of this particular episode, or I could be qualifying all day long. But the first thing, and I've said this before, and if you've done any core value work with me, you know that I'm going to say this. The very first thing that you look at is inside versus outside. Core values are inside of you. Principles and beliefs are outside of you. See, I'm still doing it. My work, and I tell people this is my work, is to help you move from imitating other people's principles and priorities to defining your own for sustainable, impactful leadership. When we are trying to fit in with or align with, and I'm going to get to that word in just a minute, somebody else's principles and priorities, that means that I'm having to maneuver myself to get there. Square peg in a round hole comes up for me when I think of this kind of thing. Many times these are things that are, maybe they're just a little bit off from what our core values are. Maybe they're things that we think are important, but when it comes down to whether or not we can honor our non-negotiables and our own core values, we might compromise a little bit. So when we look at inside versus outside, this is the first step in differentiating between a core value and a principle. When I do workshops, and even when I work with my individual clients, the first thing I say is you need to understand, if you tell me that your core values are anything that are outside of you, I am going to push back and we will continue to do work. And in workshops, I usually say something flip like, if you tell me that they're a family, faith, and country, we're going to start over. Because maybe faith could be a core value, but most of the time faith is usually meant as a belief system. So I'm going to push back on those. And so what I'm sharing it with you, if you're going to look at your own stuff and say, what's the difference between my core values and my principles? First, what's inside versus what's outside. Once you get through that step, the next piece is looking at the difference between honoring versus aligning. And I have this conversation often because people think that, well, I need to align myself with my core values. No, baby, your core values are who you are. There is no aligning you with your core values. It's honoring those core values and letting your environment align itself in a way that honors your core values. This is very foreign to us. We think that we are supposed to comply with everything outside of us. But if you go back to what I say, my work is, it's helping you move from imitating those principles and priorities to honoring your own to make it sustainable. When you're wearing shoes that don't fit, it's really hard to walk. My son is 15, and I want to say through like his 12 and 13-year-old years, I must have bought 6 pair of sneakers or 7 pair of sneakers because he was growing so fast and his feet were growing so fast. Now it's like, are you still in the same size shoe? Are you sure you're still in the same size shoe? But what happens is if you're not willing to honor your core values, it's like wearing shoes that are too small, or even like when a little girl puts on her mom's shoes and tries to walk around in them. It's awkward. It doesn't work. So when we look at honoring versus aligning, to honor something is to hold it in great respect or reverence, to protect it. So is this something I need to protect and revere and respect? Or is this something that I need to align? Aligning means to place or arrange or to line up. It is a behavior modification. So when you look at whatever this is, if it's still, you've said, okay, is it inside or outside? Well, it's inside. So maybe it's respect or adventure or intuition or strategy, or for me, freedom or authenticity or belonging. What is the goal in honoring that? Is it to place it or arrange it or behave in a certain way that is going to fit in with that? Do I need to change my behavior to honor that, or do I honor it already? I know that sounds like I'm going in circles. So for instance, a principle that I would, if I say, if I have a principle of being wise, like in my 6 tenets of intentional optimism, when I have the principle of being wise, I want to change my behavior to make sure that I am respectful of others and generate and foster respect in my communities. I want to make sure that my words are careful. I want to make sure that I seek to understand other people. All of those things are principles, and all of those things are a behavior alignment that I want to do, but I don't compromise my core values in doing them. I actually honor my core values by respecting other people, because if I want freedom of thought, then I need to respect other people to let them have freedom of thought. So your core values are honored, and then they are lived out through your principles. So the first thing you're looking at is for inside versus outside. The next thing is whether you're honoring or aligning, because if you're aligning, it's a principle. It's out here. And the third piece that you really want to look at is what authority is being honored here. Is it your authority that's being held up, or someone else's authority? And I mentioned earlier that this was a big piece for many of my clients. It's hearing that word authority and saying, wait a minute, I could actually have authority. Yes, you could have authority. You have your own authority. And if you're looking at something that reinforces your own authority, then you're in good shape. And you know that you have a core value that you're working on. Now, when you decide, or you look at it and you say, this is reinforcing someone else's authority, for instance, at a job, it's like the organization's core values, they might call them core values, or the organization's principles, or like I said a minute ago, intentional optimism is the way I'm behaving. It moves the authority away from necessarily inside here to someone else's or outside of me. Then that's how I know it is not one of my core values, because if I dishonor that, then it's giving someone else the authority over me. So those are the 3 things that I think are really imperative when you're looking at figuring out whether something is your core value or whether it's a principle. And it, depending on where you are in your walk with core values, like you may have downloaded the freebie and you think you might have your top 10 or your 5 or your 3, or maybe you're working through it. Maybe you have a little notebook and you're keeping track of them. The first thing to look at is, are they inside or outside? And the next thing is, am I honoring or am I aligning? And that is going to probably be your biggest differentiator, because I think when you get down to the authority piece, it's pretty clear where you're putting your authority. Every once in a while, I'll find a client who's like, oh my goodness, I was giving my authority away by not honoring my core value. And they were actually honoring a principle, or they were doing something or aligning in a way that didn't honor them. And so it plays out in for me in having both the core values and the 6 tenets of intentional optimism. I have my principles out there. I have them. They're easy to see. But when I did, and I shared this on almost every interview that I do, in 1995, I did the Franklin Covey planner system. And I may have shared this on an earlier podcast, but I walked through Stephen Covey's book and I came up with my governing values. And what's interesting to me is that most of them are what I would consider principles. They are outside of me. They are things by which I want to live. They are peace and tranquility, self-control, honesty and transparency, family, there it is, physical health, friendship, nature, creativity, and the very top one was freedom. And I've learned that the things that I value, or the principles that I have, are always honored by my core values in specific ways. So if I want to make sure that my critical thinking is, or my belonging is honored in my family, I show up differently in my family. My behavior is modified differently to have my privacy honored, or to have safety and beauty and nature. All of those things are great, but they are not my non-negotiables. And as an entrepreneur, it's easy to take your core values and then go from that to how you want to show up, which is your principles. And having both of them is like having a realistic roadmap for how you want to live and do your life. Your core values, or my core values, give me my compass, and my intentional optimism gives me that mode of transportation. Now, I'm going to tell you from the beginning, it's not bad to borrow somebody else's principles. There are lots of really good leadership principles out there, good character values. I'm a Maxwell team person. So it's like I'm certified in Maxwell stuff. So Maxwell actually talks about these are values that are really good to have as a leader, or values to have in your company. Those are all really good things, but I would say they're principles that can be honored by our core values. So when I talk about borrowing someone else's, you can do that. You can borrow mine. That's what intentional optimism is there for. And it's a great starting point. And it may be that those principles are enough for you to be able to say, all right, for now, I have my compass and I have my mode of transportation, which is how I'm going to live this out. And then you can move forward. It may be that you adjust your principles from time to time. If you have a family and you have small children, it's going to be a little bit different looking than when your children are older. I had to actually stop the recording in the middle of this because my son came home and I wanted to let him know not to come downstairs because I was recording. So it's a little different than saying, all right, my family, I have to have a snack ready and I have to do all this because he's doing his own, which is really good. But the basics of stand tall and own it, when we look at what it means to stand tall and own it, it's to take that compass of your core values and live out your own principles, behaviors, and values, or mission and vision that are going to actually give you a way to honor your core values. My invitation to you is to, number one, if you haven't done it yet, do the work of uncovering your core values, because they will show you where your authority lies. They will show you what your conviction and passion is and how you can live that out. And they will give you that confidence to take, if you're borrowing principles, mine, Maxwell's, anybody else's, if you're borrowing those principles, it'll give you the ability to do that with confidence and to have authentic magnetic leadership. Now, of course, if you want to start your journey, start it with a plan. And if you go to my website, or in the bottom of these show notes, right above my head is a button that says free core values exercise. That is the easiest place to start. And of course, if that's not enough, I have a course, I have coaching. Either way, you got this. This can be your compass and this can be your roadmap, and both of them together, having your core values and your principles lined out, is really going to give you the confidence to be you in all the situations where you show up. So that's the difference between a core value and a principle. I'd be very curious to hear how helpful this was, or not. Maybe I talked in circles. You let me know. DM me on Instagram or LinkedIn. Let me know you heard this podcast episode and you'd like to chat about it. You can email me, Andrea@theintentionaloptimist. If you're on YouTube, of course, please like and subscribe and share. When you share this information with other people, they have more awareness, they grow, and we can do this better if we do it together. We can stand tall and own it. Until next time.